In the last lecture module, we saw that Weinberg, Nichols, and Stich seemed to present data to support hypothesis 1 and hypothesis 2, namely that intuitive categorization judgments of subjects appear to vary across cultures and appear to vary across socioeconomic status. One response or objection to their claim that intuition-driven romanticism is undermined by these variations across cultures and socioeconomic groupings embraces a sort of epistemic relativism to avoid abandoning intuition-driven romanticism. Specifically, the objection goes something like this. Look, your data just shows us that epistemic intuitions are relative to particular cultures or societal classes. Since our epistemic intuitions really do reflect our underlying conceptual structure, then it must be the case that our epistemic norms are in fact relative in the ways that your data reveals. So they embrace relativism to avoid abandoning intuition-driven romanticism. Now, Stich is actually sympathetic to epistemic relativism, but the difficulty here is that the classes to which you would have to relativize epistemic norms don't look like the sorts of classes or features of classes that you would expect. So rich people having fundamentally different epistemic norms than poor people doesn't seem like a result that's likely to be upheld by further investigation. Another objection that they received was that the differences in epistemic intuitions are relatively small, even if they're statistically significant. And hence, questions can be raised as to whether or not they're philosophically significant, given that they're not particularly large. Why, the objection would go, should we suppose that these differences are philosophically significant, given that they're small? The response that they present in the paper is that the results are actually systematic, and in some cases, explicable intuitive variations consistent with the findings of researchers such as Nisbet. I would also note that once one acknowledges any reasonably large variation in intuitive verdicts, one has to at least modify the basic IDR story. Another objection to their thesis in the paper asserts that the term knowledge actually has many senses, and so your data might be driven by secondary or unepistemic senses of know in cases where it runs contrary to the dictates of intuition-driven romanticism. Now, they did control for the sense of know that corresponds to feeling subjectively certain. Other explanations, they note at this point, are mere conjecture and need to be verified and supported before they need to take them seriously. Another objection that they report having received is an objection that asserts that, look, the intuitions that you're reporting here are just reactions to the vignettes. They don't carry the model property of necessity, of a sense that the intuition reflects what must be true in all cases. So these are just reactions and not the sort of intuitions that have the force of necessity and normativity behind them. However, they respond to this objection by noting that there aren't a lot of intuitions that philosophers could use if this is the criteria, because there are differences even amongst philosophers with regard to the intuitive categorization of various cases. Note that even Westerners are not univocal in their intuitions about Gettier cases, even the classical Gettier cases. A similar objection claims, look, you need more than mere knee-jerk reactions. The intuitions of interest to intuition-driven romanticism involve some reflection on the details of the case and one's overall commitments. Their response is that their subjects often did reflect before answering. Moreover, since the differences, at least in Westerners and East Asians, seem to reflect differing worldviews, reflection would probably increase the differences as opposed to decrease the differences. Still another variation of this kind of objection claims that, look, what you really need is the sort of intuitions that emerge after long reflection on the subject and discussion with others who are also thinking about these issues over long periods of time. In other words, philosophers. Now, they admit that their experiments don't recreate that process, though intuition-driven romanticist theorists have never demonstrated that such intuitions converge. And I would, in fact, note that one would expect more theoretic convergence within philosophy on this view. Also, intuition-driven romanticism is challenged if intuitions and concepts are so difficult to explore or change as a result of interaction and reflection within oneself or with other individuals.